Hey guys, I am so sorry that I have to be out today. I do have jury duty. And what I want us to do is we never lose a day in A push. So up until this point, you should have already turned in your key terms. Um, and again, the dates are, we're still at a point where the dates aren't perfect. So I'm going to give you guys a lot of grace. As long as you assigned a date to each key term, tried your best to put that in chronological order and you have all the definitions and the key people, you should be okay. So if you have yet to do that, better make sure the sub gets those key terms because we're going to start to load up that grade book. We will still be quizzing on Wednesday. So if yet to do it, make your own Quizlet or roll the dice and find one that's already made. But I'm hoping Wednesday, week after week after week, we just start getting ourselves into that routine of turning in key terms, quizzing them on Wednesday. So we're starting chapter 2. We finished chapter 1. Stations are posted on Schoology if you didn't get an opportunity to finish those. I will reference them specifically in my review video for the test. So you're definitely, if you don't do it yet, you're going to definitely do it by this Wednesday when my review video comes out. Okay. So chapter 2 is announcements.
Teachers and students, could you send freshmen W through Z, please go to the auditorium for photos. Again, that's freshmen W through Z, head to the auditorium.
Anyway, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, chapter 2. This chapter is really about colonization. We have to learn the story as to why we care more about English interaction than Spanish and the Dutch and the Portuguese and the French. Why is the English the ones that we're messing with when the Portuguese are the ones that were the first to go, and that the Spanish were the ones that found all the gold? But there is a story. So first thing that we're going to cover, if you look at the screen, I want to know who's where. Where are the Spanish? Where are the French? Where are the English, right? Where are the Dutch? Where are the Portuguese? Where are all these European powers? Because we want to know how they're mingling with American Indians. But we also want to know who's going to stand the test of time. And that's definitely the English, because that's who we're going to fight for independence. I want to know what their reasons are for colonizing. And I actually have like a nice little graph that it's not a graph, it's a chart. You're going to get a chart. And in your chart, you're going to see like bit by bit. I'm going to post the key on Schoology. Who's doing what? Where are they? Why are they colonizing? Geography, where are they going and how that's affecting what they're doing. Population sources, just because they're there, how are they bringing more people into the New World? Because y'all, this is a trip. This takes a long time. What are the Portuguese doing? What are the Spanish doing? What are the Dutch doing? What are the English doing to get people on boats and bring them over? Because there's a lot of different techniques that they're using. What are their political and government systems? We're going to start to see our first examples of representative democracy outside of a monarchy, which is really interesting. And it's definitely going to be run by the English more than anyone else. Religion, you're going to have things like Puritans and Pilgrims in this era. Economy, how are they making money, right? The whole idea was gold. Remember, God, glory, and gold. But what is gold? Is it real gold, like the Spanish, or are people learning to make money in other ways, like with tobacco? Okay. Population growth, again, a constant competition to get bodies into the New World. And how is everything going as more land is constantly being taken from Native Americans as colonists are interacting with them? So let's go. I'm not going to go through a thesis. Here is, this is Lord Baltimore. As you know, Baltimore, Maryland. If you see down here, you see the Chesapeake. Whenever you see the Chesapeake, I want you to think Virginia and Maryland, because that's the Chesapeake Bay. So we're going to kind of skip over this right now because I'm not directly testing you on Lord Baltimore, but you can definitely see he's passing on his lineage to his son. That's the kid in the dress. That's his boy. All right. So section number 1 is all about Spain. So we have to learn the story of Spain and then learn the downfall of Spain. It's kind of fun. And it's only in one section, so it doesn't take too long. So we do know Spain had Columbus first. He thought he was in India. He really wasn't. And then they send Cortez, and he interacts with the Aztecs, right? And they learn a lot. The Aztecs are forcing other groups to pay tribute. There's a lot of gold. But eventually, through disease and a little bit of war, the Spanish are going to completely take over Mexico and work their way up, okay? One of the things that they do that is a key term is the encomienda system. This is land grants from the crown, allowing the conquistadors to claim tribute, basically to force people that already lived there to pay them taxes. And you're also going to see kind of a labor exchange, and they're exploiting that Indian labor for sure. They find precious metals like Mexican gold and Andes silver that's pouring into Spain. And I might have mentioned this in some classes. I'm not sure I mentioned them in all classes, but in some classes, I know I mentioned ruinous inflation. What does that mean? They bring so much. They bring too much. When you have too much of something, it loses its value. So all of a sudden, Spain, the one that's setting the standard in this idea of gold, they're starting not to become as influential as they were before because of how much. It's very much like a play on that repeating history of Massa Musa and Africa, almost like the same story as far as how we're going to study it. Okay. They also create the casta system where they engage in racial mixing of marriages. You're going to have like firstborn at the top, born in Spain. Anyone that's Spanish but was born in the New World, they're kind of like tier 2. Tier 3 would be any mulattoes, any marriages between a native and a Spanish born or a newborn Spanish birth in the United States, and so on and so forth. They kind of like they create this hierarchical society associated with racial mixing. And here's like an awesome indication of what's going on. So like y'all look in 1520, 1530, 1542, right? You got New Spain being established, Spanish Peru, and then the Portuguese in Brazil are starting to make lots of money in 1542. And then you have a break. Like, look at that. And then no one's coming into the scene until 1607. Like, what's going on? Y'all, this is a great reason for that inflation. Spanish they didn't have it anymore. Their eyes got too big for their stomach and they couldn't sustain it. They weren't making a lot of money. They did see a little bit of rebellion with the Pueblo nation. So then they tried to award them their freedom. It just was a mess. And they didn't have enough care. They didn't have an economy to keep spending in the New World, and inflation just destroyed them. And slowly but surely, the English are fighting back, and they're actually going to kind of destroy the Spanish on the world stage. And we're going to talk about that in a second. The Colombian Exchange is something that we started our thesis statements on. We did that. Not everybody finished the thesis statement, but we're definitely getting more exposed to it. Here for your test, make sure you know what's going on and what's being brought in and what's going out. All right, so you have disease. That's a huge aspect. That could be one of your reasons in your thesis, right? Smallpox and syphilis. Plants and animals, so lots of agriculture. You've got maize, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and tomatoes. That's all coming into Europe, right? So all of a sudden, the old world has at their fingertips, they have more resources, okay? Which can mean a lot of things, especially for an economy. Whenever you have more food pouring into a nation, you should generally see the rise in population. The rise in population is going to happen. What are the Europeans bringing the Americas? They're bringing cattle, swine, horses, chickens, honeybees, and that's going to transform America, our way of life and the things that we see just because of that exchange. And it's, it's Spain's big contribution to the age of exploration in the Americas. It's definitely a staple of what they bring. And you're going to see again, population growth is going to be the result of all of that. Now, our third reason, right? Here's our religion. So we went through a lot of economic gain. We went through agriculture, disease. Another reason or another thing you could put in your thesis statement was religion, right? This Protestant challenge to Spain. Spain's status in Europe had the power because of their wealth, but they also had constant enemies, and they weren't winning in the Protestant Reformation. In the English Reformation, we have the little episode between King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine. I'm not going to go into that because I'm not testing you on it. But when the Spanish bring in too much gold, you get the offspring of King Henry VIII of Anne Boleyn after he chops her head off, and that's Queen Elizabeth. And all of a sudden, Queen Elizabeth has the necessary funding to fight the Spanish Armada. And she wins. They called it her sea dogs. She wins. When she does that, Spain pretty much cuts off all activity with the New World. If they are engaging in any activity in the New World, it's going to be in the Sugar Islands. They're really pulling away from North America. They're pulling away out of Mexico. They're pulling their way out of southern or southwestern United States.
Please report to the auditorium for your photos.
Announcement.
Again, as juniors A through D, report to the auditorium.
By 1600, England had the resources they needed to challenge Spain's control. So again, in this period of time, you've just got like 50 or 80 years on that timeline where Spain, they're thriving, but that inflation is going to hit them. And then they're going to lose against the English. And they're just not topic of interest anymore. But they're still a part of the story, which is important because of that Colombian Exchange, right? Because of that initial finding of gold. And other European countries are learning how to deal with American Indians. Are they going to practice intermarriage? You're not going to see a lot of examples outside of Pocahontas and John Rolfe with the English practicing intermarriage. The French are going to try it a little bit. Spain developed whole communities. So it's interesting that they're kind of like the dummies, right? They're the crash test dummies in the age of exploration. Here's an image on smallpox victims. Right. And this is definitely an American Indian village. We don't know, even in your book, it's not like specifically stated, but you can just see the tragedy of it all. You have just utter sadness and can I zoom in? Utter sadness and confusion, right? And they're not disposing, actually, they're not disposing of the bodies correctly, and that's actually spreading the disease. And then you see some examples of animism here, right? So just utter despair because of what the Spanish had brought over, what the English will bring over the French, and smallpox, eradication of a lot of groups of people because of disease. I showed you all this on Thursday after we took our quiz, an example or a visual of the Colombian Exchange. I did at one point have this on a test. I don't know if I continue to, but you will definitely have questions on Colombian Exchange because it's very important. If I do see it on the test, I will mention it in my review video. Okay. Oh, and another thing is look also how Africa is being brought into the grand scheme of things, especially sugar and rice. Rice is going to be the staple crop of South Carolina, the colony of South Carolina, to feed all the slaves in the transatlantic slave trade. So that's going to be something we're going to talk about. And it's going all the way into the Dutch East Indies Company. So, I mean, you're having this massive amounts of trade and instituting things that aren't, home in the United States. Queen Elizabeth. Plantation colonies is section 2. So Spain, quick story, how it came to power, how it failed. Make sure you know that for your test. Plantation colonies are all going to start with the Portuguese in Brazil. They are going to give these Southern American colonies, which we will talk a lot about once we become a country, right? Basically their outline, how they do things, why they do things, right? The Portuguese are big into sugar. They cultivate it, they mill it, they extract it, they refine it, and then they ship it all over the world through the Colombian Exchange. They first are going to enslave those native populations. They're dying out because of disease. We talked about that last week. And now they need a new form. And that form is going to be importing numbers of African slaves. By 1620, Brazil was officially a sugar colony based on the slave labor system. Most slaves that were taken out of the continent of Africa will end up in South America and in the sugar islands. North America, in the grand scheme of things, barely gets any. I'll have a graph that I'll show you. And it's interesting because we talk about it in context of the American slave system before the American Civil War, and it is a part of our history. But most, more than half of slaves that were taken from the continent are actually not coming to North America and in the English colonies. They're going to be in South America and in the sugar islands. Okay, so let's talk about England. Now, England's on the scene. Why? Because the Spanish inflation is crazy, and the English Elizabeth Sea Dogs beat the Spanish Armada. So they don't even have equity anymore. They don't have the assets. They ran out of ships, and they ran out of money to fund or to continue to keep going. So most of the colonies that they're operating under, they're doing it with the assistance of the Portuguese, and they're going to be in the Sugar Islands. So North America is pretty much, I mean, they still have St. Augustine, the fort in St. Augustine. They are still a little bit of presence in Florida at this time, but not enough to take advantage of resources in the way that England is going to do. So England is slowly becoming more and more powerful. Elizabeth is doing a better job than people had given her credit for. And all of a sudden, a new kind of economic system is growing through joint stock companies, which is going to be a key term. And you get Virginia Company. Virginia Company will get on a boat, a bunch of men, pool their money together in a joint stock corporation. They call it Virginia Company. And they land in Jamestown, Virginia. That's what they name it. Jamestown after the king. And Virginia after the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. So this is happening in 1607. They're all men, they're traders, and the whole goal is to make money. They want to find gold like the Spanish did. Now, do you see how I have this crossed out, y'all? Spanish gold, exploit Indian labor too. They're going to take a key from the Spanish, but I have this crossed out. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Even though it's a plan, it doesn't happen. And that's important. That's why it's in pink, and that's why it's in bold, and that's why it's crossed out. So when you think of the Spanish, they kind of created the blueprint, but that doesn't mean people stuck to it. Okay. You have the Powhatan tribe that's associated with the Algonquin Nation. They're not necessarily all getting along very well, right? Because your Algonquin Nation doesn't necessarily see land as ownership, and the English are coming over and they want it. And they get into a really big conflict on, well, who's going to pay tribute to whom? Because the American Indians are like, well, we know this land isn't yours. We know the land belongs to itself and we're here. So we're not going to force you to pay us land, but you are here. So we do deserve tribute. And then the English are, well, we can bring you better things. We're powerful. We're better. You should be forced to pay tribute to us. And that's what's going to start this huge, huge conflict, right? This fight over land, this fight over tribute and taxation. Okay. And then enter in John Rolfe. So the first couple of years of seasons are really bad. The first winter you have like cannibalism. It's really nasty and it's really bad. And then John Smith comes in. John Smith makes it a very military town and saves it. Really, John Smith will be the first governor of Jamestown. They make it through the winter, and they're still struggling. What do we do? There's no gold. We don't know anything about the resources. We can plant corn. American Indians did teach them to plant corn, and we'll talk about Pocahontas too. But then John Rolfe comes on the scene. So you got John Smith, and then you got John Rolfe. When John Rolfe comes on the scene, he brings tobacco, and they plant tobacco in the region. Okay, and it saves Jamestown. You see how I have all of this, y'all, down here? That's all underlined and bolded because that's like 2 test questions. Okay, and I'm giving you a lot in this lecture, so you can be successful on that test. So Rolfe is producing tobacco in the region. He saves Jamestown. So now they have money. Now they have land. Now they have a way to establish more settlers to come into the colony. Okay. So now Virginia Company is going to allow individual settlers to own land because you have an aspect of population growth. So the Spanish, they were struggling. They found gold. It didn't really pay off well because it caused massive amounts of inflation. And the sugar that did help them isn't going to be in North America. So they're kind of losing their way in our story in AP US history, right? They're not a prominent figure, but the English are because they're finding a way to produce gold. You see, I have gold in quotation marks because I'm talking about tobacco. And let me tell you, when tobacco becomes popular in Europe, it is a hot commodity. It's going to entice lots and lots and lots of people to come over to the American South and start growing it and shipping it back home. It's very like nouveau riche, like the new wealth, our smoking tobacco. Everybody loves it. Okay. So what is a colony to do? When more people are coming over, they're making money, they need to start to organize. How did they do that? Well, they established their first form of self-government, and that is the House of Burgess. Good luck getting through the AP exam without the House of Burgess. I promise you it'll be on a quiz. I don't even have to wait because I just told you it's going to be on a quiz. It'll be on your first test. The House of Burgess is very, very important because it's the first time on the shores of North America that we see self-government. It's the first example of self-government. And mind you, if we were back at home, if the English were back at home, not we, they would have to be following a monarch, right? But this is different. This is groups coming together who are levying taxes and making laws. And that's why
This time, if you release freshmen with last names begin with the letter L through Z. L through Z, freshman teacher groups, if you send them to.
Right, it's going to be our last slide. I'm kind of like flying through this, but I'll definitely review with you guys the Indian War of 1622. So quick refresh. You have the story of the Spanish, the rise and the fall because of inflation, because of gold, and they lacked resources and they lacked money. And then Queen Elizabeth comes in and beats them. So 1607, you have Jamestown. Starts off awful, really, really bad. John Smith comes on the scene, turns it into this military form of living, and they become successful. Then John Rolfe comes, marries Pocahontas, right? A little bit of peace for a very short period of time. He comes in, plants tobacco, and all of a sudden, lots of people want to make their way to Virginia. Because lots of people make their way to Virginia, all of a sudden, you have to start establishing government systems. And where's the crown? Well, it's nowhere. So what do? Self-government, the House of Burgesses. This is important because this is drawing the framework for what self-government is going to be used and how we're going to fight for it when we get to the American Revolution. Okay, so that's like a quick little synopsis. Now let's talk about real interaction with American Indians. Powhatan's brother. So you got Powhatan. Powhatan's baby girl is Pocahontas. Pocahontas marries John Rolfe, not John Smith. Disney's wrong. Marries John Rolfe. And she goes back to England. She pops out a couple of kids and she dies like 2 years after her second boy. It's kind of sad. But there's only one time that you're going to see the English really practice intermarriage, and it's the story of Pocahontas. And we did have a momentary peace. The first Thanksgiving, that's a whole other lecture that we don't really teach in APUSH, and we might get a chance to talk about it. But you're not seeing a lot of peace between these two groups of people. All right. Now, Opechancanough, that's his name. That's Powhatan's brother. Okay. He is going to cause an unsuccessful uprising in 1607. He's going to capture John Smith, and later he's going to become chief. This is where we get the image of John Smith being executed, and then Pocahontas comes and saves him. We know now that that's not true. That's not what happened. But what we are seeing is after peace was made, he's upset and he comes back. That's why I have it in pink. So he comes back and he kills a lot of English settlers. Okay. So word gets back to King James that the English settlers and the American Indians are not getting along, and that it might cost him a lot of money. So he revokes the Virginia Company's charter in Jamestown, and he makes Virginia a royal colony. What does that mean? It means that colony is officially under the command of the King of England. Okay. So it's not like this investment venture that it was before. Another thing to pay attention to, that doesn't mean the House of Burgesses stopped doing what they were doing. They were continuously making laws, and they were collecting taxes, and they were doing it in a representative form. Even though Virginia is going to be claimed a royal colony, why? Because of conflict with American Indians. I'll go ahead and tell you, for the most part, conflict with American Indians are going to turn all the colonies from proprietary or joint stock. Even religious safe havens are going to turn to royal colonies because of this constant conflict with American Indians. The king wants more say. The king, like mercantilism, whether it's French, whether it's Dutch, or whether it's English, they're going to want more interaction because of settlers dying, because of American Indians dying. Okay. So now settlers are following English rule, right? And that's happening in 1624. They appoint a governor, they elect an assembly, they have a formal legal system, and they all worship in the Anglican Church. That's happening in Virginia. Okay. Now, does that mean that they're necessarily following the rules of a monarch? On who you talk to, but for the most part, the way they are living and the way their governments are established are not like what's going on back home in the old world under the monarchy. Okay. So let's move to Maryland. So I'm in the Chesapeake. I just told you the story of Virginia. John Smith, Pocahontas, John Rolfe, Powhatan's brother, Opechancanough, that's his name, and how conflict is causing these venture capitalists, right? Virginia Company, now it's a royal colony because of war with American Indians, and lots of people are dying. Are things really changing though? That's the funny part of it all, is it is a royal colony now. They should be, under complete control of the king. The king ain't there, right? And that's something I want you guys to just continuously think about. In Maryland, you have Lord Baltimore. He's settling Catholics there as a safe haven. And they're also making lots of money in tobacco growing. Okay. Now King Charles of England granted Lord Baltimore this land. And it became, again, a refuge for Catholics. That's in pink. Their population is growing very, very quickly. Here's why you have to know Maryland. Virginia, make sure you know the story with John Smith, Pocahontas, Opechancanough, conflict, House of Burges, tobacco, all of that. John Ralph, make sure you know that. For Maryland, Refuge for Catholics is really big. It's the only Catholic colony. All the colonies, English colonies, are going to be Protestant. The only Catholic one is Maryland. But in 1649, they're the first colony to pass a thing called a Toleration Act, which granted all Christians in the colony the right to religious freedom. So if you wanted to be a Protestant in Maryland, you could be, right? If you wanted to be a Catholic, you could be. Toleration, do you think that that would be something that would pass in Europe at this period of time? This idea to freely believe whatever you want? Definitely not. So let's kind of backtrack. You got the House of Burges, which is a representative government, even after King James revokes the Virginia Charter and makes it a royal colony. You still have the House of Burges operating under a representative form of government. And now you have religious freedom going on in these English colonies. Neither of those things are happening in the old world, but they are happening in the new world, and nobody's telling them no. Right? This is where Enlightenment ideas are going to start to thrive. So when we talk about the American Revolution, contextually speaking, you're talking about a region of the world that's starting out in its beginning stages with things like freedom of religion and representative democracy. It's kind of like the bedrock of the Constitution, which we find a lot of things in common, like, I don't know, the First Amendment, right? And how we do things. So I'm going to stop right there. And we have some pictures of where I'm talking about. You see where it is in blue? This is the Chesapeake. So I just lectured over like what happened in Virginia, what happened in Maryland, a little bit of Spanish, and we'll pick this up on Tuesday. So big things. Make sure you're studying for your key terms. I'm going to pick 10. That's going to be on Wednesday. You should have already turned those in on Monday.
Good part of interruption. Juniors.
And more announcements. All right, y'all watch this, watch it once, watch it twice, do well, and I will see you tomorrow.